The sky burned red above the broken towers of planet Sarnix. Smoke rose from the ground. Fire danced across the metal buildings. In the middle of this ruined place, a small prison cell stood, half melted by heat. Inside the cell, a young alien girl named Malari sat in a corner, hugging her knees. Her violet skin was marked with ash, and her silver eyes were full of fear. She was from a gentle species called the Valari, who believed in peace, nature, and stories, many of them dark stories, about humans. Outside, a loud noise shook the ground. A ship landed nearby with a roar. The metal door hissed open, and from the smoke stepped a tall human in black armor. His name was Sergeant Mason, a rescue soldier from Earth. His face was dirty, and his lips were dry from the heat. Alari saw. Himan froze. Her heart beat faster. "It's true," she whispered to herself. "The human has come to eat me." Mason walked toward the cell. The door was half melted, but locked. He pulled a plasma cutter from his belt and began to slice through the door. Sparks flew. The light reflected in his eyes, making him look like a demon from the stories her people told. She backed away, trembling. Her people believed humans were strong, fast, and cruel. Worst of all, they believed humans ate their mates, the ones they loved. When the human looked at her and licked his dry lips, she screamed. Mason stopped, confused. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help you," he said softly. But Alari cried harder. Her small body shook with fear. She thought it had begun the ritual before she would be taken. Mason finally opened the door. He stepped in, hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to get you out of here." But Alari didn't understand his words. Fire had broken the translator. To her, his voice sounded deep and strange, just like the monsters in her stories. She covered her face and sobbed. Mason sighed. He saw she was scared. He placed his weapon on the ground, then gently removed his helmet. His eyes were tired, but kind. He slowly pulled off his jacket and offered it to her. She didn't move. Her body shook as she whispered something in her own language. Mason pointed outside. "Come on, you'll die if we stay here." She looked at him, then at the fire around them. For a moment, she thought maybe this human isn't like the others, okay? But then, she saw him lick his lips again. Her mind screamed, "He's hungry." "No," she cried and tried to crawl away. But the heat was too much. She collapsed. Mason rushed forward and picked her up gently. She was light, like a bird. She didn't fight back. She was too weak. He ran through the burning ruins with her in his arms. Fire exploded behind them. The ground cracked under his boots. Finally, he reached his ship, jumped inside, and closed the doors. The ship lifted into the sky, leaving the fire planet behind. Inside, Mason laid her down on a soft seat. He gave her water. She didn't drink. He opened a protein bar and offered it. She looked at it like poison. "Okay, we'll try again later," he said. Alari watched him, eyes wide. Her heart still raced. She remembered the stories her grandmother told. The human male finds his mate. Then he licks his lips. Then he feasts. Mason sat down across from her. He leaned back and wiped sweat from his brow. Then, without thinking, he licked his lips again. Alari began to cry. The ship moved through the stars, far away from the fire planet. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. But in the small medical room, fear still lived. Alari sat in the corner of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around her legs. She hadn't spoken. Since the rescue, her violet skin had turned pale. Her silver eyes followed every move the human made. Sergeant Mason stood nearby, watching her with concern. He had seen fear in many places, on many planets. But this was different. She wasn't just scared, she thought he was going to eat her. He had tried to help her drink water, eat food, even speak softly. But every time he moved closer, her body tensed. And every time he licked his lips, just from nervousness or dryness, she would shake with terror. "Why are you so scared of me?" he whispered to himself. He walked over to the corner table and opened a ration pack. He carefully picked the softest, most harmless food, a small fruit jelly. He turned around and slowly walked toward her, holding it out with both hands. Alari pushed herself farther into the corner, her eyes wide. She stared at the jelly like it was a trap. Mason stopped. "Okay, I'll just leave it here," he said gently, and placed the jelly on a metal tray near her. He sat down across the room and sighed. The small room was quiet. Only the soft hum of the ship filled the air. Alari didn't move. She didn't touch the jelly. She watched him like a prisoner watches her jailer. Hours passed. Mason checked the control panel on the wall. They were still 8 hours away from the nearest base. He looked back at her and felt helpless. Later, he took out a small device from his bag, a translator, damaged during the fire. He started working on it. Wires sparked and lights blinked. Alari watched curiously from the corner of her eye. For the first time, she tilted her head slightly. What was that thing? After some time, the device beeped softly. Mason smiled. Finally, he turned it on and placed it on the table. Then he looked at her. "Let's try again," he said. The translator buzzed and translated his words into her language. "Let's try again." Alari jumped. The voice sounded robotic, but the words were hers. She stared at the device, then at him. He smiled, then accidentally licked his lips. She flinched hard and hugged her knees tighter. Mason groaned. "Not again." He stood up, walked to the other side of the room, and sat with his back to her. He didn't want her to feel trapped. After a few minutes, he heard a soft sound. "Huh." He looked back. Alari had moved. She was reaching toward the jelly. Her fingers were shaking, but slowly she picked it up and sniffed it. Then she looked at him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just nodded. She took a small bite. Her eyes widened. It was sweet, soft, safe. She ate the rest in silence. Mason smiled. It was a small wind, but a wind. That night, Mason lay on a bench in the same room. He didn't want to leave her alone. Laurie stayed in her corner, watching him. She remembered the stories from her people. Humans pretend to be kind before the hunt begins, her grandmother had said. They show food and comfort, then strike. But this one hadn't hurt her. He hadn't even come close. He gave her space. He didn't force her. Maybe, ... Just maybe, ... The stories were wrong. She slowly stood up and walked to the tray. She placed the empty jelly wrapper on it. Then, without looking at him, she whispered in her soft voice, "Thank you." Mason sat up in surprise. He turned to her. "You're welcome." The translator repeated his words. She nodded. Then she looked straight at him and said, "Do you eat your mate?" Mason blinked. "What? No." The translator repeated it. Alari tilted her head. "But you licked your lips." Mason couldn't help but laugh. No, that's not what it means. I was just... She looked confused, but curious. Mason grabbed a bottle of water, took a sip, then licked his lips again. "See? Dry mouth." Alari watched closely, then nodded slowly. Maybe this human wasn't a monster after all. Maybe he was just weird. The next morning, soft lights blinked on inside the ship. The engines hummed gently as they moved closer to the nearest space station. Inside the small medical room, a strange silence filled the air, but it was no longer full of fear. Alari sat on a small chair near the wall, staring at Sergeant Mason. She had not run or cried today. Her silver eyes now held curiosity instead of terror. Mason sat on the floor with his back against the wall, holding a small notepad and a black marker. He drew something quickly, then turned the pad toward her. This was a picture of a stick man and a sun above his head. "This is me," Mason said with a smile. The translator repeated his words. Alari tilted her head. The drawing was simple, but she understood it. She pointed at the sun. "Fire star." Mason laughed. "Okay, no, not fire. Sun. It gives light and life." Alari nodded slowly. Then she reached for the marker. Mason paused, then handed it to her carefully. She drew something, a round creature with long ears and glowing eyes. "This is me." Mason blinked. "Huh? You look cuter in real life." Alari didn't understand cute, but she saw the smile on his face. For the first time, she gave a small smile back. For hours, they passed the notepad back and forth. They drew their planets, foods, animals, and even their people. Mason drew a tree and then a burger. Alari laughed softly. "Tree, good. Burger, scary. Burger is not scary." Mason joked. The translator repeated his words. She giggled. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. Then she drew something sad, her family, a mother, father, and a sister, standing in a row. Mason asked, "Where are they now?" Alari looked down, taken by fire, like the city, like the others. His smile faded. He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." There was a long silence. She looked at him and asked, "You lose people too?" Mason nodded. "Timed. Yes, a long time ago." That moment made something change between them. The fear was not fully gone, but now there was a small bond built on pain, honesty, and drawings. Later, Mason took out a small bag and opened it. He pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. It was a music player. He placed one small speaker near her and one near himself. He pressed play. Soft music began to play, a calm, slow tune with gentle guitar and a female voice singing in a language Alari didn't know. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a song," he said. "From Earth, my mother's favorite." Alari closed her eyes and listened. Her body relaxed. "It sounds warm," she whispered. Mason smiled. "Yeah, it reminds me of home." She looked at him. "Your home is not full of monsters." Mason shook his head. "No, it's full of people. Some good, some bad, like everywhere." She nodded. "My people told us humans are hunters, cold, dangerous, and your people believe humans eat their mates." Mason added, grinning. Alari smiled again. "I know now. It is wrong. You have not eaten me yet." Mason held up a finger. "Yet." Alari covered her mouth with her hand and laughed again. This time it was real, open, and full of light. Later that day, the ship shook a little. They were getting close to the Earth Alliance space station. The stars outside the window grew brighter. Alari stood near the window, looking out. "Are your people ready to say, 'K'?" Mason walked up beside her. "K, they'll be surprised, but they'll learn." She turned to him. "Will they be scared?" "Like I was." "Maybe," Mason said honestly. "But if we talk, if we listen, they'll learn, just like you did." She thought for a moment, then nodded. Then she asked something new. "Do humans bond with other kinds?" Mason looked confused. "What do you mean? Like friendship? Like trust, even if different?" Mason smiled. "Us, we do. Some of us try very hard to do that." Alari's face softened. "Then maybe I can try too." As the ship moved closer to the station, Alari looked at Mason and said, "Thank you." "For not being the monster I feared," Mason replied. "And thank you for giving a monster like me a chance." She didn't fully understand his words, but she understood the meaning. Two strangers, once full of fear, now shared something rare in the galaxy-understanding, and somewhere deep inside her heart, the stories of terror started to fade, replaced by the truth she saw with her own eyes. The Earth Alliance space station floated like a silver moon in the black sky. Its lights blinked softly, welcoming ships from many planets. Inside, peacekeepers, scientists, Ks, and travelers moved through clean white halls. Mason's ship slowly entered the docking bay. Alari stood by the window, staring with wide eyes. It was the first time she had seen anything made by humans that didn't look scary. She whispered, "This place, it doesn't smell like fear." Mason chuckled. "That's because we clean it often." The translator repeated his words, and she smiled lightly. When the doors opened, Mason walked out first, his armor clean and helmet under his arm. Alari followed slowly, her body tense but calm. A few officers looked at her with surprise but didn't stop them. One young officer whispered, "Is that of Alari?" Another said, "I thought they never left their own planets." Mason gently guided Alari down a quiet hallway toward the medical center. He wanted her to rest and get a proper checkup before anything else inside the room. Alari sat on the bed while a human nurse scanned her body with soft, blue lights. "You're strong for someone so small," the nurse said kindly. Alari gave a nervous smile. Then she looked at Mason. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied. She looked serious now. "Why did your people attack my world long ago?" Mason was confused. "What do you mean?" she continued. "Long ago, my grandmother told us there was a species that looked like humans. They came from the sky. They burned our forests. They hunted us for fun." Mason's face changed. "That wasn't us. Earth didn't even know about your planet until a few years ago." "But they look like you," she said. "Dad, skin like yours, eyes like yours." They licked their lips before they chased. Suddenly, Mason remembered something. "Wait, you said they looked like us." She nodded. Mason opened a file on his rest device. He searched through old records and found an image of a hostile alien species, one long gone now. He turned the screen to her. "Did they look like this?" Alari gasped. "Yes, that's them. They're not humans," Mason said. "Care called Draxians. They were enemies of many planets. They copied human appearance after stealing old Earth signals. But they weren't us, not even close." Alari's hands shook. Her voice was soft. "So, the stories were wrong." Mason looked her in the eyes. They were based on real pain, but the face of the monster was a mask, a lie. She sat in silence for a long time. The room was quiet. "I was so scared of you," she whispered. "I thought if I trusted a human, I would die." "But you didn't," Mason said gently. "You lived, and you learned." That night, they sat on a small bench near the garden area of the station. Stars sparkled through the glass dome above them. Alari looked up and asked, "Do you think others like me will listen?" Mason nodded. "If you speak from truth, they will." "But truth hurts," she said softly. "Yes," Mason replied, "but lies hurt more." She thought for a moment. Then she took out a small object from her pocket. It was a round stone with carvings old symbols of her people. "My grandmother gave this to me," she said. "It was meant to protect me from the human face." "And now?" Mason asked. "Now," she said, "I think it can protect me from fear." The next day, Alari was invited to speak in front of a small group of peacekeepers and scholars at the station. She stood nervously. At the center, Mason beside her. "I was told humans eat their mates," she began, her voice shaking. "I was told they lick their lips before they hunt." "I believed this all my life." People watched her in silence. "But I was wrong," she said. "The truth was hidden. The real monsters wore human faces, but they were not human." She looked at Mason and smiled. This human saved me. He gave me food, safety, and a chance to learn. And now I want to help others learn too. The room was quiet, then filled with soft applause. Later, Mason sat beside her again. You did great. Alari nodded. I feel lighter, like the fear is leaving my heart. Mason looked at her seriously. You're changing the future, Alari. She smiled. No, we are. And somewhere deep in the galaxy, a myth had died. Not with war, but with understanding. The space station was peaceful. Its lights glowed softly, and voices of different species filled the halls with quiet chatter. Alari had started walking freely now, no longer hiding behind Mason. She smiled at new faces and asked gentle questions about Earth, the stars, and even human jokes. But peace never lasts forever. That morning, Mason and Alari were sitting in the garden dome, watching the fake sun rise. She was learning to read a human book, tracing the words with her finger. This one is hope, she said proudly. Mason nodded. Yes, that word suits you. Suddenly, an alarm rang. Security. Alert. Unauthorized ship approaching. Shields raised. Mason stood up quickly. His eyes narrowed. Stay here, he told her. No, she said. I'm coming. He didn't argue. They rushed toward the control room, where screens showed a dark ship approaching black, with sharp wings and glowing red engines. The symbol on its side made Alari freeze. It's them, she whispered. The Draxians. Her breath turned cold. That's the same mark they wore when they took our skies. Mason clenched his fists. They shouldn't be here. They were destroyed years ago. Some survived, Alari said softly. And now they found me. The ship ignored the station's warnings. Suddenly, it opened fire. Red beam hit the outer shield, causing it to flicker. The entire space station shook. Battle stations, shouted the commander. Within minutes, the peaceful place turned into a war zone. Human soldiers moved fast, wearing armor and carrying weapons. Mason grabbed his gear and turned to Alari. Go to the safe room, he said firmly. She stepped back. No, I will not run again. I ran on my planet. I will not run here. Mason hesitated. Alari, you showed me strength, she said. Let me show mine. He looked into her eyes and nodded. Then stay close. The enemy ship sent a small boarding pod. It crashed into the lower deck, cutting through the wall like a knife. From inside, tall figures stepped out. Draxians. They had fake human faces, sharp claws, and cruel eyes. They looked almost human, but something about their movements was wrong. They smiled too wide. Their eyes didn't blink. Their skin was too smooth. They copy your face, Alari said, in a whisper, but they do not have your heart. Mason raised his weapon. Let's keep it that way. The battle began. Gunfire echoed through the halls. Soldiers fought bravely, but the Draxians were fast and strong. Mason moved like lightning, protecting the injured, clearing paths, and guarding Alari. Twice, he pushed her out of danger just in time. Once, a Draxian came close to close. Alari screamed, and without thinking, she picked up a fallen blaster. Her hands shook, but she fired. The beam hit the creature, and it dropped. Mason looked at her, surprised. Nice shot. Looked at the weapon in her hands. I didn't want to, but I had to. He nodded. That's called courage. They reached the power core room. Mason knew if the Draxians reached this place, they could destroy the whole station. He set up a defense line. Only a few soldiers were left now, injured or tired. Alari stood beside him, eyes full of fear, but she didn't run. Then the leader of the Draxians arrived. He was taller than the others, with glowing red eyes and a voice that sounded like fire. We've come for the girl, he said. She belongs to us. She belongs to no one. The Draxian smiled. She carries knowledge, the old blood. She knows the truth we buried. That truth must die with her. Mason raised his weapon. "Okay, then you'll have to go through me." The fight was brutal. Blasts flew in every direction. Keeson fought with all his strength, but the Draxian leader was powerful. Suddenly, the leader pushed Mason down. He raised his claws to strike. Alari screamed. Nye scooped forward with the same blaster and fired again. This time, she didn't miss. The beam hit the leader's chest, and he staggered. Mason got up and fired the final shot. The leader fell. Silence followed. The Draxians retreated. Their ship turned and disappeared into the darkness. The space station, though damaged, stood strong. Later, in the medical bay, Mason was getting his arm bandaged. Alari sat beside him, holding a warm drink. "You saved me," Mason said. "You saved me first," she replied. "We're even now," he smiled. "That's not how friendship works." She looked at him. "Then what is it?" "It's trust," he said. "It's fighting for someone, even when you're afraid." She nodded. "Then I will always fight for you." And with that, the bond between human and alien grew stronger, not just in words, but in battle, in bravery, and in truth. The battle was over. The Draxians had left. The space station was quiet again, though its walls were scarred with burns, holes, and memories. Repairs had started, and the injured were being treated. Mason sat in a small garden room, a bandage on his arm and a cup of warm tea in his hand. Across from him sat Alari, her violet skin glowing softly in the artificial sunlight. She looked calm, different from the girl who once cried when he licked his lips. Now she smiled more. Her eyes didn't shake. She sat without fear. "You were brave," Mason said. She shook her head. "I was afraid, but I didn't let fear win." "That's real bravery," he replied. Alari picked up a small plant in a pot. Its leaves were green with tiny pink flowers. "This reminds me of home," she said softly. Mason looked at the plant. "You miss your planet?" She nodded. "Yes, but now feel less alone." He smiled. "Good. You're not alone anymore." Later that day, Alari was invited to visit the cultural wing of the station. It was a quiet hall filled with art, music, and items from different species. She walked slowly through the displays, stopping at each one. She paused in front of a painting. It showed a human child holding hands with a small alien creature. Behind them, the stars sparkled. "What is this?" she asked. Mason walked beside her. "That's called The First Bond. It's from a story about a human who saved an alien during a storm. They couldn't speak the same language, but they became friends." Alari stared at the painting. "Like us?" He nodded. "Exactly, like us." She smiled gently. "You know, my people believed bonds could only form between same-species hearts, but I think hearts understand more than skin or shape." "That's beautiful," Mason said. As they walked further, they passed a room filled with human foods. Alari looked at the dishes with curiosity. She pointed at a round, soft bread filled with green and red vegetables. "What is this?" she asked. "Taco," Mason said. "Want to try it?" She blinked. "Will it try to eat me first?" He laughed. "No, that only happens in bad human cartoons." Alari hesitated, then took a bite. Eyes lit up. It's crunchy, soft, and strange." "Do you like it?" he asked. "I think I do," she said, chewing slowly. She looked at him and asked, "Did you think we would ever share food like this?" Mason shook his head. "Honestly, I thought you would run the first chance you got." "I almost did," she admitted, "but something made me stay." "What was it?" he asked. "Your eyes," she said. "They looked scared, but not of me. Scared for me." Mason didn't speak for a moment. Then he whispered, "I was scared. You were more than just a mission. You were a connection." That evening, they sat on the edge of the observation deck. Stars outside were brighter now. Silence filled the space between them, but it was a warm silence, not an empty one. Alari broke it. On my world, when two beings form a deep bond, they share something special. What do they share? Mason asked. A soul mark, she replied. A small light on the skin. It glows when they are near someone they trust. Mason smiled. That sounds like magic. She looked down at her hand. Then she reached out, slowly, and placed it on his. Maybe some things are close to magic. His hand closed gently around hers. Neither spoke after that. The stars outside didn't change. Kalasi didn't notice, but inside that quiet room, something new had formed, stronger than fear, louder than war. The next day, news spread across nearby planets. A Valari and a human had fought side by side and survived. The old stories were being questioned. New ones were being written. Alari was asked to speak to a council of species. She stood tall and proud. Mason stood nearby, quiet but ready. She said, "We believed lies for years. I believed humans were monsters, but truth is not always loud. Sometimes truth whispers. And I heard that whisper in the voice of someone who didn't run from me, didn't hurt me, and didn't give up on me." Mason lowered his head, a small smile on his face. Alari ended her speech with words that shook the room. He licked his lips, and I cried. Now I smile, because I understand. Afterward, Mason looked at her. That was powerful. She smiled. It was real. He nodded. What now? Alari looked at the stars. Now we showed the galaxy what trust looks like. The galaxy was changing. For many years, fear controlled the thoughts of different species. Old stories passed down through generations had created walls between worlds. The Valari feared the humans. The humans didn't even know why, but now everything was different. A young Valari named Alari, once trapped in fear and myths, had become a symbol of truth. And beside her stood Sergeant Mason, a human who never gave up on her even when she cried just because he licked his lips. Weeks had passed since the Draxian attack on the space station. Repairs were complete. Peace had returned. But something else had grown during that time. Hope. Alari and Mason were now part of a mission called Unity Voice, a program that sent peaceful messages across different planets to fix broken trust between species. Their story was shared on holoscreens, in schools, and even on other planets. Children watched it with wide eyes. Some laughed when they heard how Alari once thought Mason was going to eat her. Others cried when they saw how she fought beside him. Most of all, they listened, because this was more than just a story, was a message. One day, Alari stood in a large hall inside the Earth Alliance dome. Thousands of beings, humans, aliens, diplomats, and scholars had gathered. She held a small device in her hand. It held her speech. But her heart was louder than her words. She took a breath and looked at the crowd. "I come from a world where humans were called monsters," she began. "Where your face was feared more than fire, and your kindness was never believed." Mason stood off stage, quietly watching. "I believed it too," she said. "I cried when he looked at me. I trembled when he smiled, and when he licked his lips, I thought it was the end." The room was silent, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. She walked a few steps forward, because the monster I feared became the friend I trusted. The enemy I imagined became the protector I needed. People listened closely. Some nodded. Others wiped their eyes. Alari raised the small carved stone her grandmother once gave her. "This stone was meant to protect me from humans, but it never did. It couldn't, because fear doesn't protect it, only hides the truth." She turned to Mason. He protected me, with no weapon in his hand, but with something stronger, his heart. Then she looked back at the crowd. I now know that monsters do not come from other worlds, okay? They come from lies, from hate, and from the past. But truth comes when we listen, when we care, and when we stop running from each other. The room filled with quiet applause, then stronger, then louder after the event. Mason and Alari walked together under the stars. You were amazing, Mason said. I was shaken, she replied. You were real, he said. That's what matters. They stopped at the edge of the viewing platform. The stars above twinkled like fireflies. It was quiet again, just like that first night in the ship. Do you think the galaxy will really change? Laurie asked. It already has, Mason replied, because one person told the truth. She looked at him. To people. They both smiled. Soon, they received a message. A small Valari colony wanted to meet a human in a human. They had heard the story and were curious. Alari looked at Mason. Ready for your next mission? Mason laughed. Only if you come with me. She nodded. I wouldn't let you go alone. And so, they left together. One human, one Valari. It's two souls, bonded not by blood, not by species, but by understanding. Years later, story was added to the Galactic Learning Archive. It was told in many languages with different voices. But the message stayed the same. In one classroom, a child raised her hand and asked, Teacher, is this story real? The teacher smiled and replied, Yes, and because of it, we live in a better galaxy. Then the child said, But why did she cry when he licked his lips? Everyone laughed. The teacher answered, Because she believed a lie. But then, she discovered the truth. And that truth changed everything. Somewhere, far away, Mason and Alari sat under a glowing tree on a peaceful planet. Alari looked at the stars. Do you ever think about that first day on the fire planet? Mason nodded. You mean when you screamed every time I blinked? She laughed. No, when you licked your lips and I thought you were about to eat me. They both laughed together. It feels like a dream now, she said. But it wasn't, he replied. It was a beginning. And so, their story ended. Not with fear, not with war, but with understanding, courage, and a bond that the galaxy would never forget.